Good evening, everyone. It's Iridescent. I wanted to go over an email I just sent to the Kansas Senate specifically regarding House Bill 2238 that will be reaching their floor. I think this is pertinent to every legislature across the country, and I feel it's important that everyone hears where these bills are coming from. And I will have to stop to make sure I'm not using certain language so this video doesn't get taken down off of YouTube. So this is a content warning. I'm going to be discussing transphobia, the Holocaust, as well as I'm going to discuss the use of slurs that are currently being used against our community. So I'm going to read it to you. If you feel it's important to send to any other legislator around the country, please feel free to do so. Good evening, Senators. I'm writing to you tonight to ask you to oppose House Bill 2238 when it reaches the Senate floor. I'm also requesting that any bill targeting queer or transgender Kansans be opposed as well. I'm reaching out to you not only as a constituent and citizen of Kansas, but as a transgender Kansan who wants the best for our youth and our state. There are many things we can disagree on, but fundamental human rights cannot be one of those things. HB 2238 does not exist within a vacuum. HB 2238 does not exist as the only anti-transgender bill within the Kansas legislature this year. SB 12/ what became 233, SB 149, 180, 201, 207, 233, and House Bill 2376 all target queer and transgender Kansans. Last year, I reached out to the legislature about House Bill 2210, which aimed to make gender-affirming care for kids illegal. HB 2210 didn't exist within its own vacuum either. SB 160, 208, 214, 484, 2662, 58, 496, and 515 all sought to restrict and strip queer and transgender Kansans of their rights. This is concerning. And as a transgender Kansan, this is terrifying. I grew up being taught that the goal of our country was to further rights and respect people despite our differences. But that dream was quickly shattered when I saw how my queer and trans siblings were being treated in middle and high school. And I'm signaling an alarm because, quite frankly, I'm terrified. I'm terrified because I know where this is going. And I've watched as across the country my queer and transgender siblings are being made the targets of violence and to become the target of hateful and harmful legislation aimed at erasing us. And I've experienced this myself through doxing, swatting, and I'm continually stalked with here in Kansas. We are being demonized and called many things I'm not going to list here for simply existing. And I know you know what those words are because they're used frequently. We've watched as people like Matt Walsh continue to gaslight and demonize us. Our demonization is justified by statements that say the transgender community started this, but we didn't. There was a growing effort by the same groups currently targeting the transgender community to ban same-sex marriage. And when that failed, we became the target. And we know where this ends because we've seen it before. In fact, I believe all of us grew up studying a very similar attack on a group of people. And yes, I'm referring to the Holocaust, because the parallels here are absolutely terrifying. And I know some members of this body are upset that I referred to bills like this and those who support it as fascist. But queer and trans people were targeted in the Holocaust along with Jewish people. And the reason I'm calling this out is because we've seen this happen before, and the rhetoric being used against transgender people have repeatedly been used to dehumanize other groups in Kansas in the past as well. We've seen the same rhetoric used against people of color, against immigrants, and against the LGBTQI community in Kansas repeatedly throughout history. I don't call something out as fascism if I don't have the proof to back it up. Many upset by what I'm saying will state that we didn't say we were going to kill you. Nazi Germany didn't start that way either, folks. I'm sharing an article by Randall Bytwerk, a professor of communication at Calvin College, that takes a look at Nazi propaganda and the justification used for genocide. This is only one article out of many that discuss these tactics. The article's title is The Argument for Genocide and Nazi Propaganda, and you can access the article in this video description. And if this article is too long to read or you're short for time, please read this thread by Bryn Tannehill, who has long studied fascism in the United States. It is linked in the description as well. Beitrich states that Nazis needed time to determine what they were going to do with the Jew question. This bill aims to determine what to do with the transgender question or transgender debate. This has been seen in our legislature and nationwide, and the current steps of this legislature is trying to legislate transgender people out of existence. Beitrich states that Nazis began with efforts both legal and otherwise to make the lives of German Jews as unpleasant as possible. So what is the point of all these bills? The rhetoric being used to pass anti-trans laws send the message to transgender people that we are not safe. The bill's cruelty are the point. So please pay attention to the language of those pushing these bills. At CPAC, Michael Knowles called for the eradication of transgenderism. When challenged about this, he stated that transgender identities don't exist, therefore there cannot be a genocide. But I'm here right now talking to all of you, and I exist, and I am human. Like Knowles, Hitler took a similar shift in language. Words such as destroy, wipe out, exterminate, and extirpate were used to justify the genocide of Jewish people during the Holocaust. I've heard firsthand within this legislature the calling of transgender people with slurs. And very recently, Senator Mike Thompson used this language in his line of questioning. He did this to be cruel. And how do I know? Because I sat in the hearing for Senate Bill 233, where I was denied my right to speak, by the way. And right after he asked this question, he looked directly at us, the queer and trans people in the room, and he smiled. He smiled because he knew that this would hurt us. And that's the only intention behind these bills, to be cruel and to harm. Transgender people are continually demonized, othered, and made out to be less than human. Our identities are called to be invalid. All of these are just attempts to justify discrimination, hate, and yes, the eventual eradication of transgender people. These bills are being framed in a positive light, as if transgender people are trying to take away the rights of others. We aren't. We just want the same access to medical care and the same freedoms our cisgender peers get to experience. The Nazi newsletter that I mentioned, that's mentioned in this article, wrote that the loss of Jewish people was no loss for humanity, rather just as beneficial for the peoples of Earth as the death penalty or imprisonment for criminals. These bills wouldn't be so cruel or harmful if they weren't depriving us of our basic humanity. This is why I'm calling these bills fascist and those who are supporting them fascist. This is a time to stop. There is still time to legislate with decency and with respect. These bills are simply a step in the preparation for the eradication of transgender people. If you don't feel that you are, then reevaluate what you're doing, because this is part of a larger plan, and the actions of this legislature are far beyond complacency. This is active participation. So please, listen to your transgender constituents. We've been calling out for help for far too long. We see what is coming. We see what these bills aim to do. We actively experience the effects of your actions and your words. We deserve to live and deserve to be ourselves, and we deserve to do so with dignity. I imagine it's frustrating to be called a fascist or a Nazi, but imagine how frustrating and terrifying it is for transgender people. Please stop this. Transgender people are fleeing their states, hoarding up their hormones. Some trans people are hiding their identity or socially detransitioning to protect themselves, not because they're less trans, but because it's unsafe to be publicly trans. Many have committed suicide. Our transgender youth are suffering more and more every day. And many are desperately trying to band together to make plans to protect themselves. Why? because this campaign against us is making life unable to live safely or comfortably. And that is part of this plan, the plan that is being perpetuated by legislation like this. So please listen, because we are people as well. We are human beings with families, with friends, and with dreams and aspirations to better society. How do you want to be remembered in history? There's a reason you don't like being called a fascist.